My wife's first love and I were both injured and sent to the hospital at the same time. She hurriedly rushed over and shouted at the doctor, "Save him first. He is a jewelry designer. His hands are very important." Their injuries were similar, and she questioned the doctor, "Are you really going to ruin the future of a jewelry designer?" After saying this, she disregarded the doctor's hesitation and directly pushed her first love into the operating room. "However, I am also a jewelry designer." Jessica looked worried, but her concern was for Ethan, not for me. The pain in my hand was unbearable, but it couldn't compare to the anguish in my heart. The wife I have loved for 8 years suddenly felt like a stranger. I weakly called her name, only to receive an impatient glance in return. "Ethan is suffering so much. How can you do this?" Jessica exclaimed. "Let's wait to do the surgery. After all, there's no immediate danger to his life." Saying this, she disregarded the doctor's hesitation and insisted on pushing Ethan into the operating room, demanding that the doctor perform the surgery on him first. There are many doctors in the hospital, and Jessica only said such inappropriate things because she was too anxious. Her words felt incredibly cruel, as if my heart had been pierced sharply, leaving me speechless with pain. Actually, Jessica made a mistake. My injury is far more serious than Ethan's. Although both Ethan and I are jewelry designers, we don't work for the same company. Our two companies recently collaborated, and we had some differences in our design concepts, which is why we gathered to discuss. While Ethan was using a machine to polish materials, he accidentally got caught in the machinery. If I hadn't helped him in time, resulting in my own serious injury as well, I'm afraid he would have lost the use of his hand. Jessica never had the chance to get angry with me. Due to the urgency of the situation, Ethan's hand injury wasn't serious, while I had sustained significant bruising and cuts while trying to save him. I couldn't tell if Jessica was solely focused on Ethan or if she was deliberately ignoring me. Regardless, that heart-wrenching feeling wouldn't change. Shortly after the surgery, when I came out, I didn't see Jessica. I couldn't help but smile wryly to myself, thinking that she was probably by Ethan's side at that moment. Although my hand is still usable, I cannot hold a paintbrush or operate instruments, and to me that feels no different from losing my abilities. The nurse asked about my family, and I had no answer because my wife is with another man. In the evening, Jessica finally arrived, looking a bit weary. I asked her, "Where have you been?" Jessica frowned slightly and replied with frustration, "Where could I possibly go? Of course, it's about taking care of Ethan. I heard you saved him today. After all, the incident happened at your company, so you bear the responsibility. Also, when it comes to work matters, you should follow Ethan's lead. He just returned from abroad, and naturally, he knows more than you do. Work, my hands can no longer design jewelry, so discussing work is meaningless." After Ethan returned to the country, her attitude toward me changed dramatically in just a few months. When I first met her, she was aloof and proud, but she never treated me with such coldness and sharp words as she does now, completely disregarding my feelings. I can't understand what has happened to her. Ethan has been abroad for nearly 10 years, and we haven't been in touch. Now that he's back, does that mean their first love is rekindled? My hand is injured, making it impossible for me to continue my jewelry design work, so I plan to resign. I said this bitterly. Jessica was a bit surprised, but soon composed herself and said, "Just resign then, focus on recovering at home." I felt a little down and asked her, "Don't you want to say anything?" She knows that jewelry design is my dream, which I've mentioned many times. Most of our wedding rings and her jewelry are designed by me, and everyone knows how much I love jewelry design. Yet now, she offers no words of comfort, only lightly saying that I should take good care of myself. Jessica wants to say something, but just then, her phone rings. "Jessica, where have you been?" My hand started to ache again. She looked deeply concerned and asked, "Ethan, are you okay? I'll come right over." After the call ended, I closed my eyes and calmly asked, "Jessica, are you really going to leave?" A flicker of reluctance passed through Jessica's eyes, but it quickly vanished. "You're a grown man. Can you stop being so sentimental? You can always find another job, so what's the point of acting so negative?" She paused for a moment and explained, "I just want to check on Ethan. He said he's in pain and needs someone to be with him. If he's okay, I'll come back right away. Can't I have someone by my side for support?" I couldn't help but say, "Normally, I wouldn't talk to you like this, but right now I really want to know if you still have any feelings for me. Even if it's just a little, I could understand her concern and favoritism towards Ethan today. However, she impatiently replied, "Aren't you fine? Stop talking nonsense. I'll just find you a caretaker. You're really being annoying, it's not very manly." I had so much to say in my heart, but I couldn't get the words out. Seeing that Jessica was already in touch with the caregiver, I decided to keep quiet. After all, the answer was clear. Jessica didn't care about me at all, so I had no need to say anything further. 8 years of relationship felt unfamiliar at this moment, making my heart ache and my breath difficult. Before the caregiver could arrive, Jessica hurried off to Ethan's place. Watching her hurried figure fade away, a wave of bitterness surged in my heart. I asked myself if such a version of her was still worth my love. Is there still a need to continue this marriage? The answer is already quite clear, yet even now I still find it hard to let go. After nearly 10 years of feelings, who can easily move on? After being discharged from the hospital, Jessica has not shown up at all, not even a phone call. However, I often receive messages from Ethan. In his photos and videos, Jessica appears gentle and considerate in a way I've never seen before. Looking at the empty house, I couldn't help but smile wryly as I dialed her number, which she answered after several seconds. "Ryan, are you bothering me? Didn't you already hire a caregiver? Why are you calling me? I'm really busy." Her tone sounded quite impatient. Indeed, she was very busy, taking care of Ethan and chatting with him. I could hardly figure out whose wife she really was. I was so preoccupied that I didn't even notice it until I was discharged. With a self-deprecating smile, I thought, "Jessica, let's talk." After a moment of silence, Jessica coldly replied, "About what? There's nothing to talk about between us. Stop messing around. I'll come to see you later." She hung up the phone, and I heard the busy tone in my ear, feeling a bit dazed. A few minutes later, I received a voice message from Ethan. Although I felt a bit anxious, I still opened the message. The content made me alert. "Jessica, you've been here too long. He might not be happy about it." Jessica sneered. "What right does he have to be unhappy? If you hadn't left without a word back then, I wouldn't have had to find a substitute." Ethan sighed. "It's all my fault. After all these years, can you forgive me? Anyway, you're married to him now, so just live your life well," she replied. "Moreover, he saved me again this time." Jessica immediately retorted, "He was supposed to save you. Is his ability better than yours? If you can't continue with jewelry design, that would truly be a great loss." My fists tightened more and more. The wound ached faintly, yet I couldn't feel it. I fixed my gaze on the phone screen with an unprecedented seriousness, as if I might find evidence that the recording was fabricated. "But I know it's true, it really is what they said." Ethan spoke with a tone of resignation and affection. He said, "Oh, I really think you should be a little gentler. After all, people are about to lose their jobs." Jessica smiled and replied, "He wouldn't get angry with that, since I only show my tenderness to you." The recording ended here. However, this conversation, which felt like a tormenting execution to me, didn't truly come to an end. Every word Jessica said was like a sharp knife, deeply piercing my heart and causing it to bleed profusely. I couldn't help but touch my chest, tears flowing uncontrollably as my body began to shiver slightly. At first, she took the initiative to get close to me, often gazing at me in a daze, and she particularly liked the way I looked when I was drawing design sketches. These were all obvious signs. But I finally understood that she really didn't love me. I would rather she had simply lost interest than to think that she was using me as a substitute. That would mean she had never truly loved me from the very beginning. My sincerity and affection ultimately became a complete joke. Thinking of this, I cried and then laughed, but the tears just wouldn't stop. I knew that I must look terrible right now. However, I understood that after crying and laughing, my relationship with her was finally over. It was time to put an end to this farce. Later that evening, after I had calmed down, I sent a simple text to Jessica, "Let's get a divorce." As a result, the message seemed to disappear without a trace, receiving no response at all. I felt indifferent and simply told my lawyer to prepare the divorce agreement. It would be ready for signing when she returned. I didn't expect Jessica to come back that very night. I had just finished grocery shopping and returned home to find her sitting on the sofa with a troubled expression. I was a bit surprised, but quickly regained my composure. She spoke first, coldly asking me, "What do you mean by the message you sent?" "The literal meaning," I replied calmly. Jessica seemed somewhat dissatisfied and half-jokingly asked, "Why? Are you angry just because I didn't accompany you?" Ryan, when did you become so petty? I used to act generously, but it was actually to hide my inner jealousy. Her excessive concern for Ethan leaves me feeling hopeless, but I love her and choose to be tolerant and trusting. However, she has never taken my feelings into account, hurting me again and again. Ultimately, I am just a substitute in her heart. How could she truly fall in love with me? Now that the person she really likes has returned, I have decided to take the initiative to step back and maintain some dignity for myself. I calmly stated that I wasn't angry. Getting a divorce is a decision I have thought through seriously. This isn't something I'm discussing with you. Let's leave it at that and part ways amicably. I believe Jessica won't oppose the divorce. After all, she is finally reunited with the person she cares for. There's no reason for her to continue entangled with me, and it's clear that she has grown tired of me. Hearing this, Jessica was taken aback, appearing somewhat incredulous. Are you serious? I nodded, but didn't say anything further. She paused for a moment, furrowing her brows and said, Ryan, what's the big deal? Is it really worth arguing with me over something so trivial? Don't you think that's a bit unusual? I don't have time to play with you. Ethan is still waiting for me in the hospital. I didn't expect her to think I was throwing a tantrum. What does she really think of me? At that moment, my expression changed as I said seriously, after the divorce, you can immediately go back to Ethan. Jessica, I'm telling you, let's get a divorce. She was taken aback for a moment, then sarcastically replied, Sure, you'd better be serious. Don't regret it when the time comes. If you realize you're wrong, just apologize to me now, and I won't hold it against you. Hearing her say this made me feel a mix of amusement and sadness. How humbly I once loved, and now, at this point, she can still say such things. I quietly looked at her and said nothing. In this moment, silence spoke louder than 1,000 words. Jessica's expression grew increasingly unpleasant. After a while, she suddenly let out a cold laugh and said disdainfully, All right, Ryan, you really have some skills. I agree to the divorce. I've long stopped liking you. Don't think for a second that I'll be reluctant to let you go. Before she could finish speaking, her phone rang. She took a look and immediately answered the call. Her tone softened as she said, Ethan, what's wrong? Ethan replied, Jessica, haven't you explained things to Ryan yet? Don't let him misunderstand. She sighed. I can't seem to make him understand. Jessica paused for a moment and changed the subject. Ethan, is there something you wanted to talk to me about? Ethan chuckled softly. No, I was just worried about you, and I've missed you. She replied, Then I'll head back right away. When she answered the call, I expected to feel distressed, but at that moment, I felt completely calm, like still water, without a hint of turmoil. After hanging up the phone, Jessica frowned at me, her eyes showing signs of irritation. She said in a low voice, Let's find a time to take care of the paperwork. I don't have time right now. We'll talk about it once Ethan is better. I frowned and said, No, we need to deal with this as soon as possible. Some things, once decided, must be resolved quickly to avoid delays. Are you really in such a hurry? Ryan, is there something wrong? I've already said there's no time. Ethan is in trouble. Can you take responsibility for this? I didn't feel like saying much to you. She hurried out of the house, her silhouette appearing a bit flustered. I sighed, thinking that after a few more days, it was clear that this marriage was definitely over. After quitting my job, I spent all day at home. I tried to draw, but I couldn't stand it after just a few strokes, so I had to give up. My parents called to check on me, and I only mentioned the divorce. They do not have a high level of education and are not very accepting of divorce, but once they learned that I was unhappy, they immediately agreed without hesitation. They even encouraged me to return home to relax when I faced difficulties. My relationship with Jessica feels a bit like I have climbed up the social ladder. She comes from a well-educated family and has had a relatively privileged life from an early age. It took me over 10 years to become a jewelry designer and finally stand by her side. Therefore, her parents do not have a high opinion of me, and many people may think they would be pleased by our divorce. After careful consideration, I decided that after the divorce, I would return home to accompany my parents and also give myself some time to reflect on my future. However, ever since the last unpleasant encounter with Jessica, she hasn't returned home or contacted me about the divorce. Is Ethan's condition really that serious? It shouldn't require such a long hospital stay, right? Of course, I won't naively assume that Jessica is dragging her feet and doesn't want the divorce. She might have influential people around her, which could cause her to forget about other matters. I didn't want to delay any longer, so I made the call right away, but it wasn't her who answered. Ethan said lazily, "It's Ryan, isn't it? Jessica is in the shower right now and can't take the call. Just tell me what you need." If I had heard this before, it would have made me very upset, but now I felt completely calm. It's as if the person he mentioned isn't my wife, but a stranger. I replied calmly, "Then why don't you ask her when she has time to handle the divorce paperwork together?" "Ryan, why are you pushing? It's not like I'm unwilling to get a divorce. Is it really necessary to call just for that?" Jessica's voice came through. I interrupted her impatiently, saying, "How long has it been already? If you don't handle this soon, I'll have to get a lawyer." There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then she said, "All right, come over. I'll send you the address." I asked, "Can't I just go directly to the Civil Affairs Bureau?" She replied, "If you want to get it done quickly, just come over first." I agreed reluctantly, although I didn't understand her reasoning. I felt I had no choice but to go along with her for the sake of getting a divorce. The address Jessica gave me is her parents' house. I've only been there once, the day we got our marriage certificate. She must have forgotten that detail, otherwise she wouldn't have sent me the address. After all, she once said that place is her private space, and no one is allowed to just walk in. So, over the 8 years of our marriage, I've only been there once. When I saw Ethan, I felt a bit surprised, but it also seemed quite normal. Ethan smiled slightly and said meaningfully, "Ryan, you're here. Don't get too worked up. Just have a good talk with Jessica." How could it escalate to divorce? Jessica sat on the living room sofa, gave a cold smile and said, "If we're going to get a divorce, then let's do it. It's not like it matters." I shrugged my shoulders and replied nonchalantly, "I'm here specifically for the divorce. Can we head to the Civil Affairs office now?" Upon hearing this, her temper flared even more. "Ryan, have you lost your mind? Just because I wasn't by your side while you were hospitalized, are we getting a divorce over such a trivial matter? I've taken care of Ethan since he was young. Isn't that something I should do? Also, you can't continue with jewelry design. What does that have to do with me? If that's the reason, I can recommend expert doctors for treatment." Ethan chimed in, "Yeah, Ryan, that's enough. Jessica is my sister, but we don't have much of a relationship, so don't get me wrong." Upon hearing this, Jessica frowned and didn't respond. I found it somewhat amusing. What was going on here? I said slowly, "Your matters have nothing to do with me, no need to explain. I'm here to get a divorce. Are you done? Go ahead and take care of the paperwork," I said. Jessica looked at me for a moment, her teeth clenched, and said, "Just don't regret it after the divorce." I replied, "Don't worry, I absolutely won't." Upon hearing this, her expression darkened. This puzzled me. Didn't they think they could be happy together after the divorce? What does she actually want now? I shook my head, not wanting to think about it any longer. The paperwork was processed quickly, and after enduring the 30-day divorce cooling-off period, I received my divorce certificate, feeling very happy. Jessica seemed to be affected by my mood and asked sadly, "Are you really that happy? If you had been a substitute for 8 years, you would have made the same decision as me." I said lightly. Her face turned pale in an instant, and she hurriedly asked, "Who told you?" I smiled and replied, "Your crush is Ethan." Jessica immediately understood and anxiously said, "So, is this why you want to divorce me?" Ryan explained, "You've misunderstood. At first, I did have that thought, but later it disappeared." He then said, "Whether it exists or not doesn't really matter. Let's part on good terms." After I said that, I left, and Jessica stood there, seemingly still in shock, repeatedly calling my name. I had already bought my ticket home, and after packing my luggage, I hurried to the airport. Looking out at the blue sky and white clouds, I felt an immense sense of relaxation. After several hours of travel, I finally returned to my hometown. My mom had prepared a hearty meal for me, and my dad was waiting at the door. A warm wave of emotion surged in my heart, and I couldn't help but smile. At the dining table, they thoughtfully didn't ask too many questions, and we happily finished the meal together. After dinner, I was chatting with my parents, enjoying our conversation, when suddenly my phone rang. It was a call from Jessica. I felt a bit frustrated that I actually forgot to block her number. I hung up the phone directly, but she called back shortly after. To avoid worrying my parents, I stepped aside to answer. "Where did you go? What does that have to do with you?" Jessica said with a tremble in her voice. "I'm sorry. I admit that at first, I really mistook you for Ethan, but after getting to know you, I realized you are both completely different. As for that recording, it was just a joke between him and me. It doesn't reflect my true feelings, so please don't take it to heart. Ethan and I have already had a huge fight, and there will be no more contact between us, so you can rest assured. She said a lot, but I found it very annoying. I coldly replied, Jessica, there's no need to explain. I don't care. We have already divorced, please do not contact me again. No. Ryan said, I know you blame me for not letting the doctor operate on you first. This is my fault, I was too impulsive. At that moment, all I could think about was that if something happened to your hand, the design world would lose a rising star. Jessica's voice grew quieter, and I couldn't help but want to laugh. I said coldly, since you believe your decision is right, what meaning does an apology hold now? She replied softly, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Looking at the jewelry in the box, I felt a sense of regret. Indeed, your talent should not go unnoticed. Unfortunately, it's not my talent that lacks design but yours. Jessica exclaimed eagerly, it's not like that. Then, I recalled your design days when you were full of passion, with a sparkle in your eyes. I knew how much you loved jewelry design and recognized your talent. So I suggested, how about I take you abroad for treatment? I've inquired, and there is still a chance for recovery with proper treatment. I smiled gently, feeling a sense of irony in my heart. She understood my passion for design, yet when I was feeling down, she chose to say hurtful things. I didn't need that. Jessica, I just want you to stay out of my life. After saying this, I hung up the phone immediately and blocked her. I don't want to see this person again, nor do I want any contact with them. As for treatment, I have considered it, but I won't give up on jewelry design, which is a career I am passionate about. I plan to spend some more time with my parents before going abroad for better treatment. As for Jessica, I'll just consider these past few years a waste. After a few days together, my parents have noticed my state, but they didn't ask me about it and I didn't bring it up. Considering that this is an important matter, I felt it necessary to have a talk with them. After finding a suitable time, I had a heart-to-heart conversation with them. Although they verbally scolded me for being foolish after I finished speaking, they actually felt very concerned and expressed their support for my idea of going abroad for treatment. I embraced my parents tightly, overwhelmed by a surge of emotions, mostly happiness. Only they could truly understand how I felt. I didn't expect that Jessica had actually found my hometown. Previously, she complained that my home was too remote and was unwilling to come here. Instead, it was my parents who traveled all the way to our city. Now, she surprisingly decided to visit, which left me feeling somewhat taken aback. But more than that, I felt irritable. Why was she so persistent after our divorce? My parents were very dissatisfied with Jessica after learning about our situation, yet she continued to wear a smile, trying to please them. No matter how coldly she was treated, she always smiled cheerfully, completely unashamed. Ideally, I shouldn't have reacted to such an attitude, but my parents have simple personalities, and her behavior left us unsure of how to respond. We sat there together in an awkward silence. I frowned and pulled her to the door, asking her what she was doing there. I had told her many times that we were divorced and hoped she wouldn't bother me anymore. Hearing this, Jessica responded with a bitter smile, saying that she wanted to take me abroad for treatment. I know that you're still angry, but the person I love is you. I hope you don't misunderstand things and that we can return to how we used to be. This is truly the funniest joke I've heard this year. You love me? Her love has hurt me, so she must really love me, doesn't she? I said with disgust, I'm not angry. I divorced you because I no longer love you. I feel that this marriage no longer needs to continue. It's not like you think, where I'm just being difficult. Jessica looked sad and softly said, please don't say that, Ryan. I know I was wrong. Can you give me another chance? I have lost my patience and replied sternly, no. Jessica, can't you understand? Please stop bothering me, and don't disturb my parents either. You're coming abroad with me, Jessica said through gritted teeth. I smiled helplessly, feeling that she was not open to any reasoning. I decided to stay silent, believing that she would soon realize she couldn't handle it and would go back on her own. To my surprise, a few days passed, and Jessica still showed no signs of wanting to leave. She was busy every day cooking and doing chores, and since this was a girl who had never cooked before, her skills were, understandably, a cause for concern. Seeing the burned dish on the table, Jessica felt a bit embarrassed and said, Ryan, Mom and Dad, I'm not very good at this, but I can learn. Mom and Dad exchanged glances between us, then sighed and left the dining table. Jessica looked disheartened and said sadly, I'm sorry, I'm just so useless. It was indeed surprising to hear such words from her, who usually takes pride in her high education and successful career. After all, she rarely shows such vulnerability about anything, except when it comes to Ethan. I said coldly, Jessica, that's enough. You can leave now. However, Jessica insisted, no, if you don't go abroad with me, I won't leave. She was trying to make me worry and impact my parents, hoping that I would eventually compromise. However, I was already planning to have my parents go on a trip to get away for a while, so Jessica would stop bothering me. Unfortunately, before I had a chance to discuss this with my parents, I was forced to go with Jessica. Jessica first followed my plan and took my parents on a trip. Although it was her idea, I felt deep down that something wasn't right. When I heard the news, I was furious and immediately questioned her. Jessica, what do you mean? Why can't I reach them on the phone? Where did you take my parents? Jessica sighed and said, my parents are fine. They hope you can go abroad for treatment. I just told a little lie. Ryan, it's okay if you don't want to forgive me, but you can't keep dragging this out. I squeezed the bridge of my nose, feeling a surge of anger, and said sharply, who gave you the right to make decisions for me? Jessica, are you out of your mind? When did I ever say I wouldn't get treated? I just want to cut ties with you. I beg you, stay out of my life. Jessica was taken aback and asked sadly, do you really hate me that much? I frowned and replied, yes, I do hate you right now. If you keep bothering me and my parents, I will hate you even more. Jessica stood there, looking very upset. She slowly said, you don't have to worry. Mom and Dad are fine. Hate me if you want. Ryan, come abroad with me. I really hope your hand can recover. If you don't want to, it might be a long time before we can contact Mom and Dad. Seeing her so determined, I had no choice but to compromise and agree to go abroad for treatment with her. So we first returned to our old home, where she said she needed to pack some things. When we arrived, I realized that what she needed to pack was actually the jewelry I designed for her. I sarcastically remarked that I had never seen anything designed better than Ethan's work. Why not just throw it away? Jessica's face went pale as she retorted, it won't be thrown away. What you designed is the best. I let out a cold laugh and chose not to respond. Just then, the doorbell rang urgently, suggesting that the visitor was very anxious. I went to open the door, while Jessica looked visibly frustrated. As soon as the door opened, Ethan exclaimed, Jessica, you're finally back. Where have you been all this time? I was about to go crazy. After seeing me, he first flashed a teasing smile, but then quickly became worried. I raised an eyebrow, finding it somewhat amusing, and I wanted to see what would happen next. Jessica asked coldly, what are you doing here? Ethan paused for a moment, his tone a little awkward. Jessica, what's wrong with you? I couldn't get in touch with you and was worried about you. When I found out you were back, I came looking for you right away. Haven't I made myself clear enough? Jessica responded coldly, Ethan, you make me sick. Get out of my sight immediately and don't show your face here again. Jessica asked coldly, what are you doing here? Ethan was taken aback for a moment, sounding a bit awkward as he replied, Jessica, what's going on? I've been unable to reach you and was really worried. As soon as I found out you were back, I came to see you right away. Didn't I make it clear enough? Jessica coolly responded, Ethan, you make me feel disgusted. Get out of my sight immediately, and don't show up again in the future. Her tone was devoid of warmth, completely different from the gentle and considerate demeanor she had shown earlier. Ethan's expression was terrible and shocking. He looked at Jessica in disbelief, as if trying to confirm whether her words were true or not. After a moment, Ethan pointed at me and gritted his teeth, asking, is it for him? He clearly didn't think Ryan could compare to me at all. The current Ryan is no different from a useless person. As a jewelry designer, he is unable to design, which is truly ridiculous. Jessica coldly said, don't be foolish, we're the most suitable. After that, she slapped him directly and angrily exclaimed, shut up, what right do you have to criticize him? If it weren't for him, you might have been completely finished by now. I warn you, disappear from my sight immediately. Otherwise, I will make it impossible for you to survive in the design industry. After Ethan finished speaking, he closed his mouth, shot me an angry glance, and then left unwillingly. Once he was gone, Jessica said nervously, Ryan, don't listen to him. Once you're healed, you'll definitely be even better. I couldn't be bothered to respond to her and casually opened a mobile game on my phone, starting to play by myself. Jessica's eyes were red, and she whispered, "Ryan, let's take a break for now. I have something to deal with, and in a few days we'll go abroad." I still didn't respond to her. She covered her face in despair and said softly, "Ryan, please don't ignore me. Just say something to me, even if it's just a single word." I replied coldly, "Keep your distance from me." Jessica broke down in tears, repeatedly saying I'm sorry, but I remained as calm as still water, quietly playing on my phone. After leaving my hometown, she gave me my parents' itinerary, and I successfully got in touch with them and arranged for them to spend a few days at my aunt's house. I took care of all the details. My aunt's son is a police officer, which put my mind a little more at ease. I planned to find a time to go abroad myself, as I really wanted to cut ties with Jessica once and for all. I intended to leave when Jessica was not home, but before I could step out, I received a phone call from the police. It turned out that Jessica had hired someone to injure Ethan, and his family wasn't to be messed with, so they immediately reported it to the police. I heard that she was consumed by her hatred for Ethan and did something so extreme. Both Jessica's family and Ethan's family have considerable influence, and it seems that this matter won't be easily resolved. Jessica might have to stay in there for a while. She tried to meet me several times, but I refused each time. Then I quickly got ready and flew abroad. Later, my hand fully recovered, and I became a well-known jewelry designer. As for Jessica and Ethan, I haven't heard anything about them since, and they have gradually faded from my memory. In the days that followed, I focused solely on pursuing happiness and joy.